We hear all the time that free trade is the secret sauce, right? The only way for an economy to really thrive. But what if I told you that's not the whole story? What if nearly every single major economic power out there, we're talking the US, China, you name it, used a pretty controversial tool to get to the top? That tool is called protectionism. So let's dig in and see how this strategy can actually turn an underdog into a world champion. Okay, so to really get why protectionism can be such a big deal, let's imagine a classic David versus Goliath situation. On one side, you've got this small local startup. They're making, say, 100 electric scooters a month. But on the other side, a global giant, a massive factory just churning out 100,000 scooters in that same month. I mean, the difference in scale is just staggering, right? It's almost hard to wrap your head around. Which leads us to the million-dollar question. How on earth can that little startup even dream of competing? I mean, really, what chance do they have against a giant with that kind of advantage? It feels like an impossible fight from the get-go. Well, this huge disadvantage really boils down to one core economic idea: economies of scale. See, because the giant is making so many scooters, their cost for each one is incredibly low. We're talking so low that they could probably sell their scooters in the startup's hometown for less than it costs the local guys just to buy the parts. So you can see, without some kind of help, that startup is pretty much doomed before they even get started. And that is the startup's dilemma. It's this classic catch-22 that so many new businesses get stuck in. Think about it. To lower your costs, you need to make more stuff. But to sell more stuff, you need to have lower costs. It's this vicious cycle, and it's almost impossible to break out of on your own. So the question is, how do you break that cycle? Well, this is where a really powerful economic idea comes into play. It's called the infant industry argument. And the thinking behind it is actually pretty simple. You treat a new industry like a baby. It's fragile, right? It needs to be protected. It needs a safe space to grow up, shielded from all the big, tough competition out there until it's mature enough to stand on its own 2 feet. Okay, so if you're going to build this protective shield, how do you actually do it? What are the real-world tools a government can pull out of its toolbox to give these infant industries a real fighting chance? Basically, when a government decides to step in, it has 2 main go-to moves. The first one is tariffs. You can just think of these as taxes on stuff that's imported. And the second one, subsidies. That's pretty much direct financial help, cash basically, from the government to local companies. Let's zoom in on tariffs for a second, because they're by far the most common tool you'll see. How exactly does putting a tax on an imported product help the little guy? Well, the way it works is actually pretty straightforward.
So here's the play-by-play. That scooter from the global giant shows up at the border. Right then and there, the government slaps a tariff on it, which is just a tax, right? That tax instantly jacks up the price of the imported scooter. And just like that, the locally made scooter, which used to look way more expensive, is now suddenly priced competitively. It's a really simple, but man, a really effective way to level the playing field.
But here's the thing, protectionism isn't just about surviving day to day. That's not the real endgame. The bigger goal is to create a space where these local companies can do more than just scrape by. It's about giving them the breathing room they need to actually grow, to learn, and ultimately to innovate. And this is where a fascinating concept comes in: psychological space. I mean, let's be real, starting a business is always a huge risk. But think about it, who in their right mind is going to invest in a tiny startup that has to fight a global giant from day one? It's a suicide mission. Protectionism lowers that massive initial risk, and that makes it way more attractive for investors to actually take a chance on the local guy. So by de-risking the market, you're letting these local companies actually start making some real money selling at home. And that money, that's the fuel for innovation. It's what they can pour back into R&D, into figuring out how to make better products, how to make their factories more efficient. And listen, this is not just some theory from a dusty old textbook. We have real-world examples. Just look at South Korea. Back in the 70s and 80s, their government put up huge protective walls around its new electronics and car industries. This gave companies we all know, like Samsung and Hyundai, the protected space they needed to grow up, safe from the big global players. And the result? Well, today, they aren't just competing on the world stage, they're absolutely dominating it. But, and this is a huge but, there is a dark side to all of this. That same shield that helps a young company grow can turn into a cage. It can actually stunt their growth and stop them from ever becoming what they could have been. Yeah, you really have to think of protectionism as a double-edged sword. On one hand, sure, it protects a new company from those big foreign competitors. But on the other hand, it can completely kill their motivation to innovate and get better. If you protect a company for too long, it just gets comfortable, complacent, even lazy. Economists actually have a name for this: the lazy infant problem. It's what happens when a company gets way too comfortable behind those protective walls. It just loses its hunger, its drive to get better. I mean, why would you bother trying to innovate or cut costs when you know the government has your back and is keeping all the real competition out? The company just stagnates. It becomes totally uncompetitive. So you really have 2 roads this can go down. The whole point, the goal of protectionism, is to create this powerhouse company that's innovative and can take on the world. But the huge risk is that you create that lazy infant instead, a company that's stuck in the past, totally inefficient, and can't survive for a second without the government's help. Okay, so how do you avoid this trap? How does a government make sure it doesn't just create a bunch of lazy infants? The key, it seems, is making sure the protection comes with strings attached. First, it absolutely has to be temporary. It needs a clear end date. And second, it should be conditional. The company has to hit specific targets. A government might say something like, look, we'll help you out for 5 years, but by year 5, you better be exporting 20% of what you make. That forces them to get ready for the real world. All right, so let's tie this all together. The big takeaway here is that it's crucial to see protectionism not as some permanent fortress to hide inside forever, but as what it's meant to be: a temporary, strategic tool. I think the best way to think about it is like a greenhouse. That's the perfect metaphor for how this is supposed to work, right? You're creating this warm, safe environment where a fragile little startup can grow strong roots, all while being shielded from the crazy storms of global competition happening outside. But, and this is the most important part, eventually you have to open the greenhouse door. The whole point is temporary nurturing, not permanent isolation. The goal is to raise a company that's tough enough to thrive out in the storm, not one that can only survive inside a perfectly controlled garden. And that, right there, brings us to the fundamental challenge of this whole idea. Protectionism is an incredibly powerful tool, no doubt, but it's also a really dangerous one. So the real question that every government, every policymaker has to wrestle with is this: how do you know when nurturing ends and coddling begins? It's an incredibly fine line to walk, and if you get that balance wrong, the consequences can be huge.